Chairman, and I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you, Mr. President. But first, we address the substance of the topic of the VTC today. I would like to express my regret having to do with the fact that the Security Council, yet once again, in order to conduct a discussion on important issues of maintaining international peace and security, is using the virtual format for that. We do not think this is justifiable. We all know that the Security Council chamber at the headquarters is safe. Proof, we had 10 Security Council in-person meetings in October last year under Russian presidency. And this COVID-19 situation in New York today is a lot better than it was then. Being overly cautious on the part of our colleagues can cast an unfavorable light on this Security Council as compared to our colleagues in the General Assembly, who regularly have in-person meetings in their chamber. Nothing is stopping us from doing the same. Now, given all of that, I call upon the Vietnamese presidency and the upcoming Chinese presidency to undertake practical steps to switch our meetings into in-person meetings in the Security Council chamber. Mr. President, we are grateful to Geir Pedersen and Mark Lowcock for their briefing. The situation in Syria remains challenging. And despite the relative stability on the ground, there is a considerable worsening of the socioeconomic and humanitarian situation in the country, and this has to do with relentless sanction pressure exerted by the collective West. The most serious situation we're witnessing in the territories in the northwest, north and northeast, which are not under the control of the government. And the responsibility for this is borne by the de facto occupying countries and the local authorities. We are concerned by the continued interethnic clashes in the Trans-Euphrates area. And the reasons for the increasing clashes between the Kurds and the local Arab tribal associations lie in the continued foreign occupation of these areas. An additional destabilizing factor here is the continuing airstrikes by Israel against the Syrian territory. On the political track, we continue with efforts to make sure that the inter-Syrian dialogue is successful. We continue our close contacts with the Special Envoy, Geir Pedersen, and with the Syrian parties. We urge them to work constructively and to find mutually acceptable solutions. And we do hope that it will be possible for him to bring Syrians together at the negotiating table in Geneva within the framework of the sixth session of the drafting commission of the Constitutional Committee. At the same time, we'd like to recall that this process is Syrian-owned. Any interference or imposing conditions from the outside is unacceptable and will only lead to the result opposite of what is desired. In a little bit less than a month, the presidential elections will take place in Syria. And despite all of the difficulties, the Syrian authorities are undertaking efforts to ensure that the state system is functioning. At the same time, we lament the fact that some countries are up in arms against the very idea of the upcoming elections and have already declared them illegitimate. We urge to stop creating a negative informational background for the future elections, which has nothing to do with the work of the Constitutional Committee. Interference in the internal affairs of Syria is unacceptable, is in contradiction with the existing norms of international law. And Geir Pedersen basically factually confirmed that today. We noted something that appeared in April in the American media. There was a comment made by the former special representative for Syria in President Trump's administration, by Mr. Jeffrey. He stated that the organization listed by the Security Council as a terrorist organization, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is, according to him, an important American asset, end of quote, in Syrian affairs, and is, quote, the lesser evil in Idlib, end of quote. Therefore, in his opinion, this jihadi group needs to be supported. Well, there's nothing to add to this kind of revelation and the basic return to the logic of they're good terrorists and they're bad terrorists. And this is how former politicians do tell us about the real rationale of what is being done by our American colleagues. Mr. President, as regards the humanitarian situation in Syria now, we welcome the first supplies of the COVID-19 vaccines into the country last week. And this context, what is important is to make sure that it's equitably distributed amongst all of those who need it. We are convinced that the Syrian leadership will act very responsibly here. Damascus, more than once, and indeed has shown that they are ready to work with you and openly. The most recent Secretary General's report on the humanitarian situation in Syria in March, April this year shows directly that there is a fast growing number of permissions given to the UN for the UN humanitarians to conduct operations in government-controlled territories, including by WHO in Trans-Euphrates. The Northeast Territory does receive the needed medical assistance, but the reason for the stalling of the humanitarians' work on the ground is now the growing fuel crisis. And this is in a country with vast oil deposits. Colleagues, Syria, and with Syria, the UN and its partner NGOs will encounter a paradoxical situation where the humanitarian assistance coming to the country will remain in warehouses only because there isn't enough fuel for it to transport to those who need it. The very fuel which is being pumped from the Syrian soil for their own interests by the American occupational authorities in the northeast of the country. And this could lead to the halt of the work of mobile medical facilities, and the Secretary General Guterres is stating that directly in his report. Are you going to accuse the Syrians of that as well, or will our Western colleagues have the courage to call a spade a spade? Now, on the Brussels 5 donor conference, about which I'm sure we will hear more excellent things in the course of the day. We note that the organizers of the conference are pushing forward the very impressive donor pledge figures. But this is far from being the main indicator, and we've had an opportunity to learn that on the experience of the 4 previous such conferences. And really, it couldn't really be otherwise, because Syrian authorities are completely ignored in all of these efforts and work, and in the end, the Syrians end up with receiving very little. Whereas the serious problems having to do with rebuilding the country after 10 years of direct foreign interference are being overlooked. It is a pity, in particular, that the official page of this conference, in the list of statements, you will not be able to find the appeal launched by the president of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer. And this is probably because what he said about the destroyed infrastructure in Aleppo and Raqqa Also, what he said about sanctions, which make ordinary Syrians suffer, which deprive them of access to basic services and food, do not fit with the usual theme about how generous Western donors are. Mr. President, literally a few days ago, the Ministry of Defense Air Flight uh, took 44 Russian children out of the camps Al-Hol and Rosh. And we are working on repatriating 120 more children. Now, given that the security situation in the camps is worsening, the responsibility of states to repatriate their citizens, the citizen home, is growing exponentially. And we call upon colleagues to enhance their efforts here, to ensure that their citizens, and first and foremost children and women, decent conditions. Mr. President, the absence for exactly 1 year now of any progress in launching of even one humanitarian convoy into Idlib from Damascus, we consider this situation to be an open sabotage. And we will take this into account when we work out our position as regards the extension of cross-border mechanism in July. If our colleagues, for political reasons, do not want to open a channel, a cross-line humanitarian channel, and they are only prepared to work through a cross-border channel, well, then how can we be talking about the comprehensive commitment to the territorial integrity of Syria on behalf of the Security Council? Condoning this kind of duplicity in future would mean undermine the image of humanitarian response as a whole. And that system is tasked with pooling efforts of everyone to save the lives. Nor should we close our eyes to the fact that receiving support from the cross-border mechanism, the terrorists in Idlib use the civilians in the enclave as a human shield and do not allow those who want to do that to leave for the government territory through the recently opened checkpoints. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement.